Welcome to this new idea. I'm your host, Conrad Meyers. I'm here in Vallejo, hoping to have a nice creative conversation with my guest today, Christy Chan, who is live streaming from possibly studio. I guess we'll find out in a second. Um, Christy's off to the side for a moment.
Hi.
Hey, how are you?
Good, how are you?
Oh, happy to be talking to you, despite all horrible circumstances.
Same.
Yeah, we've been trying to make this happen for a little while, and we both kind of have been moving a little slower with this conversation because you were in the middle of so many things. You didn't know what was the new idea and what wasn't the new idea. So
Yeah.
I'm excited that it finally came together this week. The show went on a tiny little bit of a hiatus while I worked out some new technology and took advantage of the fact that it was so miserably hot in Vallejo that this room was too hot to be in to record this. Um, but now it looks like we're maybe past that for a little while. But in the meantime, we're dealing with national unrest post COVID, or I guess during COVID, uh, due to horrendous police matters out of Minneapolis and George Floyd. Who the memorial service was today, which was extremely moving and terrifying, and gave me hope and anxiety all at the same time. It's kind of wonderful that you're my guest because you've dealt with work about um, varying degrees of racism for a long time, and not that we need to talk about that, but I just want to acknowledge that I really appreciate your voice being on this show today with all these horrible things happening.
Thank you. No, I appreciate that. It's funny because when you first asked me to be on the show, we were like talking about, well, what should we talk about? And I was like, I don't know what we should talk about. So now we happen to be talking during the week where, there's lots to talk about. Yeah, I mean, a lot of my work is about um, racism and white supremacy. Um, so it's been my work since, before Trump was president.
Yeah,
It was part of my work when I was like 10, but I didn't realize it at the time.
yeah.
So, yeah, there's been a lot to think about. Um,
Do
and
you?
I know
Oh,
you think deeply about these things as well. So,
yeah, and
yeah.
I think what I thought what was interesting. I I thought one thing that was interesting was how we both have made it a point in our practice to really try and provide a forum for other people to speak. And you had talked about that really interestingly in my little inquiry for subjects and conversation topics, and kind of talked about the idea of not feeling like your voice can be elevated. That you can't get accurate feedback because you feel like nobody has similar life experience to give you accurate feedback. Is that the gist of kind of what you were saying?
Um, I can't remember. Can you say that again? I'm not sure.
You had mentioned the idea of, geez, I wish I could look at the language now that I'm like frozen thinking about it. Just that when you present uh, ideas that you feel like aren't part of kind of white patriarchy, that the response isn't, that you don't know how to gauge the response if they didn't get it, or if people get it and are kind of pretending due to the difficult subject matter. I might be just like adding a bunch of things due to how full my mind is after the last 48 hours of news television. But
Yeah.
there's something to kind of You and I both wanting to lift the voices of others, but then also kind of not knowing where that goes. Opening that door and kind of allowing it to happen.
Yeah.
Your very recent project, which occurred at the Richmond Art Center last year, where you would kind of opened up to the community and allowed them to submit a certain amount of characters that you would then put via projection on the side of the Richmond. What was that building specifically?
That was the City Hall of Richmond.
Okay,
the
that was actually the City Hall of Richmond.
Yeah.
Yeah, and now that project has new legs, right?
Yeah. So one of the statements. So just to explain what it was a little bit, in case people don't know, I gathered statements from citizens in Richmond, and so it was a hybrid social practice video projection project. And Richmond happens to be one of the most diverse cities in California and the Bay Area, socioeconomically diverse. A third of the citizens are foreign born. There's a lot of undocumented immigrants. So I did a project kind of in response to the fact that the word wall has been weaponized by the Trump administration.
Right.
And government walls were weaponized to, kind of make certain populations feel less safe or put them on their toes. And so I wanted to give people a chance to take the word wall back in a way, and give them a government wall to stand together on versus be divided. So to let a government wall unite them with their voices instead of divide them. And so I gathered these phrases, and they were projected. 100 of them were projected. And then recently, my friends at 100 Days Action were putting together, they were working with Paint the Void, or Fill the Void, I can't remember, Paint the Void, to put up posters in the mission that were directed at essential workers to thank them, to, and a lot of these were on storefronts that had been boarded up, so they asked me to contribute something, and I didn't. And so what came to mind was to take one of the phrases from the Richmond project, because essentially the spirit of that project was, hey, what do you want to say to the entire Bay Area if you could say it? What are the 7 or 8 words? So and a lot of the phrases that came back were about perseverance, survival, thriving in 100 Pines. So so I picked a couple of phrases that I thought also fits the current times, not just what just happened last year or the time that we were in last year. And talked it over with 100 Days, and we decided to put the phrase, it was originally written as against all odds, I survived and thrived. And we put it up on storefronts in the mission as against all odds, we survived and thrived. Right. And I tried to reach the person who wrote the phrase, but part of the project was that people could submit anonymously in order to feel more freedom to say what they wanted. So the person who submitted that was Vicky. So it's in a way now that phrase has a second life. It's almost like a little message of encouragement that spread from one city to another, which it felt like an interesting thing to do, because I'm not even sure how much, Richmond is definitely part of the Bay Area, but I'm not sure how much cross-city dialogue there is between arts in Richmond and arts in San Francisco.
Right.
So, yeah.
And the 100 Day Action Project is in San Francisco.
They're based in San Francisco.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm talking to Jeremiah Barber's still super involved, right? He's one of the co-founders.
Yeah, he coordinated my piece as well.
That's great. I'm going to talk to him. I'm going to talk to him next week. It looks like.
Okay,
with
cool.
this. So
they work very hard at what they do.
Yeah,
so.
It was so. I talked to him about that when it was just launching. We were both at UC Davis, teaching at winter semester, and I would take the train up, but I hitched a ride from him one day just because we were shooting the shit for too long, and he kind of talked at length about that project, and I kind of talked about some other projects. It was really early, like it must have been, in the first 20 days of the first 100 days. So they were just kind of getting rolling. It was really exciting.
Wow.
So do situations like this when you're when the world is tuning in to the sorts of ideas that you've been exploring throughout your career, do these get you enthusiastic and motivated, or do you feel frozen?
I feel pretty consistent in my interest in the topic of racism and white supremacy and being anti-racist.
Yeah.
I don't think I'm necessarily more activated when these things are happening. I'm definitely thinking about it.
Right.
I'm activated in the sense that I'm shocked and concerned by things, but
Right.
it doesn't take me from like here to here.
Mm-hmm.
Like I'm kind of already very concerned all the time.
Yeah.
So it brings me joy. I feel joy to see that there's more mobilization.
Yeah.
It also brings up more critique for me. Critique of, essentially we're in the middle of a civil rights movement now.
Yeah.
And so it's amazing to watch all the ways people are taking action. Because there are so many ways to do so. There's not just one right way.
Mm-hmm.
But it's brought up, I think, maybe new levels of critique of how it's being related to, how it's being responded to, the fact that protesters are being met with violence.
Mm-hmm.
So there's just, and even, I would say much of what I was thinking about all last year was, I don't know what the exact form it's going to take yet, but a lot of my student time last year was thinking about critiquing white wokeness.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know that I'll necessarily even still end up doing a project about that, but that's something that's been on my mind. Because I feel like with any kind of movement, the more numbers, the better. But I feel like with this particular civil rights movement, which has been, the fire on the stove has been on for a while for it to turn into a movement. I just see a lot of things I question, and I want it to be a meaningful movement.
Right.
So I guess I'm trying to do my part, and I try to support everyone doing their part. But I just hope it isn't just a reactive. Movements can be reactive, but I hope it's also proactive.
Yeah.
So like in 3 weeks, when the temperature feels like it's lower, people don't just go back to not advocating anymore. And I'm not an activist. I would not call myself that, but I'm an advocate.
Yeah.
And a lot of my work has required advocating the funding of the project or the support of the project to white gatekeepers.
Right.
And I've been very fortunate in the sense that I've had a ton of support from gatekeepers, but I've also had, the opposite of support.
Yeah.
The point isn't even so much like how much support do I have, but just where are we in this larger timeline where conversations about racism can be normalized versus whitewashed or dumbed down or segmented.
Yeah.
Something I'm noticing coming up in the past few weeks, with what's been happening with the George Floyd protests and the conversation around that, is that there's been a lot of conversation about how Asian Americans need to be part of this. It made me think about the fact that there's been a narrative, I think, in our culture that race is a binary issue,
Mm-hmm.
that it's a black-white binary topic, and I think a lot of that has been to the service of white supremacy, and a lot of times that narrative was created by white supremacy.
Right.
So I've just been part of my research last year for the things I've been thinking about was I was reading all these books about what the South was like. Because there haven't been many books written about what the relationships between minority groups were during right after emancipation, right, and during Jim Crow. So I've been reading these. I've just been doing this research because I really want to understand how the conversation became so binary,
Right.
it's just been really interesting to find out that a lot of it has been by design. There was there's one book in particular I'm reading about Mississippi, and you know this already, I'm sure, but like when Chinese workers were brought in to replace freed slaves on plantations,
Right.
There's all this documentation about how the white plantation owners in the South, they discussed the fact that the danger of bringing in another group to exploit was that now they're going to have two groups that would potentially overpower them if united. So that was one of the things discussed as far as, well, how do we replace the slave labor? Oh, let's bring in all the Chinese people, but let's not let them fraternize. So I've just been reading all this stuff because I feel like everything's more complicated than it's on the surface, and I'm really glad it's a topic of conversation. I'm glad it's being posted, that people are saying, you know, Chinese for Black lives, Chinese, you know, against anti-racism.
Right.
And I think it is worth looking deeper at how this binary occurred, because the binary spurs white supremacy and no one else.
Right.
So these are the things I've been thinking about. Sometimes I think about things for a long time before they turn into something. I mean, it could be like 10 years. So.
That's awesome, though. I mean, I think that the excitement that I have to talk to somebody like you with your practice is, you know, that you're working on like annual projects, you're working on kind of pop-up projects, you're working on things that you've been working on for 15 years, and then you're also working commercially on things that are wholly apart from your own, that you're kind of just offering an aesthetic eye or a technical brain and technical expertise to. And so I feel like you're firing on like so many different cylinders creatively, and I don't want to feel like we have to get sidetracked talking about the horror of current events and how they apply to kind of your particular practice. But I think just some of the things that you were, I love the there is no black versus white, it's racist versus no racist thing that I'm starting to see a lot more. I feel like I agree with you that it is a generated narrative, and I really look forward to hearing more about that research. It's not much stuff that I've done much, but like I similarly to you grew up in a place that was like almost entirely white. Except I also was white, so I like my discomfort was not comparable. But like I think my early kind of interactions with the punk rock scene and with people that wanted to celebrate otherness as unity happened early enough where I needed to get the hell out of there as soon as possible. And I don't know, I still, like, Willis and I talk about this all the time. It's like, what point did you realize that the people around you were not thinking correctly? Or that's the wrong way to say it, that they weren't thinking appropriately to the world. And like we always joke about it being like the influence of Star Trek: The Next Generation, which you've heard me give a little speech about. But like you know, it was like proximity to cities. It was proximities to like not understanding the rationale behind making someone else feel like they don't belong. And I feel like because of I mean, I don't know enough about politics to even make the assessment, but I feel like the moment is so perfect for this to last a long time. What just ignited 8 days ago, like this may be able to last forever. Like we may be able to keep this conversation right at the front of everything because of how poor of a job our leadership has done in this country, and because of how many people are out of work right now, and because of how people haven't been able to be together. Like there's all these kind of spectacular overlapping things that put a lot of people that maybe wouldn't have stood up so high in the place where they can do that. And I don't know. I hope we can keep doing what we can to keep it going, and keep the people that are working on good projects working on good projects.
What's that?
Oh, just the people that are working on good projects. Like, let's keep funneling them resources. That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to get the aggregates. We're writing a lot of grants right now. We're trying to figure out how to funnel money to people. And there's a lot of people out there that want to do that. So let's hope that works out. So have you been working during COVID?
I have. I've been mostly writing. It's funny because I had, I mean, like a lot of people, I had a packed spring schedule. I had 2 studios because I had my studios at Mills. I had my regular studio.
That's right.
And then, obviously during shelter in place, wasn't going to either. So then I set up shop in an extra little room in my house, and it forced me to kind of focus on something that was more writing centric. So I was working a lot, but I wasn't thinking of new ideas, which I think having low grade, I mean, coronavirus has been stressful for most people. And I think having that low grade stress meant that like I didn't have the mental space to like be walking around thinking of new ideas. But I was able to focus on doing one thing I was already working on. But aside from that, it was, I don't know. I was reading articles about how the psychology around the pandemic was similar. When people feel threatened, it affects your nervous system. So you sleep differently. You are physically in your body differently. You can't hold the same, even if in theory you have more time at home because you're not going to your day job, you're not taking, going to meetings and things like that. Like you don't actually have more space in your head. Right. So I just tried to accept that and honor that and not worry about it. And I mean, doing studio work is kind of, it's mentally draining anyway when it's going well. So I've always been a big fan of not worrying about how productive I'm being.
Right.
And if I'm, and I'm definitely watching the news a lot this week and paying attention and observing and, making calls and taking actions as well. But I'm not worried about, I think of a project or, I don't know, I guess because the type of stuff I think about is sort of a constant thing. I kind of trust, and I don't do it for professional reasons. I do it for personal reasons. It's just kind of a bonus that it's a profession. So I just kind of trust the arc of the experience, I guess.
Yeah.
So that's my long answer to your question. Like, am I working? I think just trying to be present and pay attention is also work right now, and like work, right. I hope everyone is doing.
Yeah, I feel like you are certainly not alone, especially with people that I've talked to with this show. Is like almost everybody is taking this opportunity to find that place within themselves again. And a lot of people have referred to it like feeling like I'm back in grad school, or feeling like I'm back in living in my parents' house. Like there's like these things where certain things that we need to do, a lot of us have been devoting the minimum amount of time per day to doing, like cooking, like taking care of ourselves, like listening to birds, you know, like watching the news, reading a self-help book, like learning a new trade, you know, like, and I feel like everybody I know is somewhat dabbling in like this open world and trying to take advantage of it, and acknowledging that like it's a goddamn privilege that they're able to do it, but that now's the time to like try to learn how to meditate for fucking finally, you know, like, you know, to try to hold on to time in a different way and accept that it's just different. Like, I don't know. I mean, and I think a lot of that was that's what me starting this chat cast was, to like replace talking to people in the world with forcing myself to do it academically.
Yeah.
You know?
You're definitely the most productive person I know during this pandemic.
Why do you say that? Just
you started it pretty quickly, and it's already, you know, it's already a regular thing. And but I appreciate you sharing that, because I think, like sort of the loss of physical gatherings is hard on. It's hard on people.
Yeah.
And I mean, thank goodness for technology and being able to like shout across your lawn at your neighbor.
You're right.
You know, having friends who live close by, and I don't know. I mean, and isolation is part of like the narrative of how things have changed during other, you know, points of history. So I try to think of it that way, that this has happened before, not this exact thing, but in terms of the pandemic, and it just happens to be the first time our generation is experiencing this level of isolation.
Yeah, I mean,
and then of course, like you said, people who don't have the privilege to stay home, they're not isolated at all, which is to their detriment.
Yeah. A lot of people have reason to be frustrated. This is the most frustrating thing I've gone through in my lifetime. And it's such a good word for it. Because it's not scary, you know, it's not like 9/11 scary anxiety. It's like, I know all the steps I need to take to not get this virus and spread this virus.
Yeah.
And all of those steps involve just staying home and not talking to anybody and wiping down my groceries when they come, you know, like all these kind of peculiar things. And we're in the position where Willis has been working 2 days a week at a pharmacy, so she's been high risk this whole time, and so we've been using that to gauge our involvement with other people. We're less protective of ourselves and more protective of others, which we're thinking. But yeah, like the screaming at, I feel like I've gotten to know at least two of my neighbors way better since we've been out here, and like our direct neighbor, we leave them bottles of wine, and they like text and bring leftovers over covered in foil with a mask on, you know, like there's ways that kind of humanity's trying to crawl out of this. And you know, I don't know if you've had a friend event, but like we went over to some friend's house and had a barbecue together, but like stayed 6 feet apart and brought our own cups and beer, and but we got to chat, and we got to like eat potato salad out of two separate bowls. Like it was very strange.
I definitely had like outdoor visits with people at my house and at other people's houses, and it makes me wonder if like when, one day when there's finally a vaccine, if we're ever going to go back to, like, it's going to be so weird just to eat off someone else's silverware again,
Yeah.
But it's interesting. I mean, it's like self-sufficiency and having more time to think. Like, I don't know. It's. I mean, it can feel like too much time, but I think especially I've heard a lot of artists say that it doesn't feel that different for them than what they already do.
Oh, wow.
Like when you're on an artist residency and you're kind
Yeah.
of,
I've never.
I mean, again, that's a privilege, but it just what I kind of think when people tell me that is that, and also being an artist is so unstable. It's financially unstable. It's like unstable in many ways, but like in some ways, trying to work as a full-time artist is boot camp for other uncertain things to happen.
Yeah.
So when I talk to my friends from kind of different circles and worlds, I feel like artists are coping the best. But if someone doesn't ever sit in a room by themselves for 4 hours, 5 hours at a time, like it literally can feel crazy. So,
yeah.
But I can sit in a room by myself for 8 hours and totally be fine.
Yeah,
but again, I acknowledge that there's privilege in that I don't have to go out and get my groceries, and other people are working so that the rest of us can stay home.
Yeah, right. Yeah, to kind of go back to that earlier thought of not working on anything. I know that that's not true, but so what are you writing? What's your writing project?
I want to talk about what I'm writing about. It's funny because you and I have talked a lot about things I work on, but like one-on-one.
Uh-huh.
And then when you proposed this, I was like, oh no, I'm not going to say this in a public way. But I can tell you what I've been working on because it's kind of already public. I've been working on a screenplay about my childhood experiences with the KKK.
Right.
I've been working on this for 10 years, maybe 11. And one of my discomforts around that project is that, unlike other projects where you can just think of it and get a little funding and go make it,
right.
Like I have to actually talk to a lot of people and raise a lot of money, and there are all these incremental steps when my nature is just to hole up with it, not talk to anybody. And I should mention too that I like, and it's probably similar for a lot of the artists that we both know, like I'm very, I just find it distracting when people give me feedback that's not solicited.
Right.
Especially because the perspective I'm giving is, it's in some ways not supposed to exist. Like there's not, because it's a binary conversation.
Yeah.
So I've been working on that, and I finished a new draft. And this is the 5th draft in 10 years.
Wow.
And it was the first period of time I'd had in maybe 4 years where I could just do that and nothing else. And I, couldn't go to work because I don't have a job anymore. I finished it. I need to do another revision, but it's I mean, for our house, I would say that, like, I feel like the rooms are all there now. The electricity and the plumbing is there. Now I'm, like, figuring out, like, the windows. The isolation was helpful because, in a weird way, creatively, because I have to connect with a time in my life in which I felt really, really isolated that I don't normally relate to in my adult life.
Uh-huh.
Because I was inside my house, like so many of us, and not seeing anybody most days, it helped me tap into that stream of consciousness.
Right.
And because it's told from a child's point of view. Mm-hmm. It's from when I was, it's based on things that happened when I was 8. I used to write the KKK on behalf of my parents. Mm-hmm. You know the story already.
Yeah.
And I didn't realize we didn't realize they were a terrorist group, so we just thought they were a church. Because their letters to us always had crucifixes and crosses drawn on them, so we just thought they were a church, and we didn't really understand the letters. So that's sort of the premise of the film. And
are you gonna play that? How are you gonna play that for kind of comedy, or are you gonna play that for drama?
Yeah, it is definitely a dark comedy.
I mean, just that specific note of the thinking they were a religious organization because there were crucifixes on it is so darkly funny to me.
Yeah, and
man.
I mean, in some ways, all I have to do with this script is tell the truth.
Yeah.
Because the truth is absurd. I mean,
Oh,
the
man.
KKK is absurd. Everything they do is absurd. Racism is absurd. White supremacy is absurd. So
Yeah.
if I just tell the truth in the cleanest way possible, I think I can make this film. And so, but you know, there's still so much crafting that has to go into it as far as making it a story. And so in terms of that being a new idea, I really feel like my job is to preserve the essence of it as I go through these steps of talking to funders, talking to producers,
Right.
and sticking to my guns and remembering what those guns are. Because it's easy, like I'm an introvert and it's easy, at least when it comes to my work, and it's easy to feel overwhelmed by too many voices. And there's just no template. I mean, there are hardly any Asian American films that have been made.
Right.
There's a new wave starting this year, but for I think almost 25 years, there had only been 2 films that have been distributed that were by Asian American directors about Asian American people. That's a long time.
Yeah.
You know, so I'm just trying to do something new here that I've been told in many meetings is making people uncomfortable.
Right.
And as I take more meetings and talk to more and more people, I just started to realize that my job is really to just protect this thing.
Yeah.
And because I'm the only person who can keep it what it is.
Yeah.
And there's a certain aesthetic and sensibility being applied that isn't necessarily what someone might think it's going to be. So I think people who, if someone already knows my work, they might be able to guess, but like in terms of like film industry people, there's just a different language there. It's not everyone in film universally thinks it's an art. And I'm looking at it as this is an art piece that has audience potential, but it's not, but it is an art.
Yeah.
So I was just telling some friends yesterday, like I just feel so fortunate that I have my art community in the Bay Area and that I have other artists that I'm friends with, because to me that's like home base for keeping myself focused when there's so many voices, and sometimes these are voices of people who have power or are in that industry, and to constantly have to tell myself, no, I have the power. This is my story. This is my idea. I might take money from you, but but it's also, it's like dating, finding the right partner for this.
Yeah.
And I have to be the right partner for them, because that's what I tell people too. Like, it's about, like, I'm not going to pretend this is going to be something it's not going to be, because it's about it being right for both of us. It has to be a match made in heaven.
Yeah.
So I'm ultimately hoping I'll find the right business partner who's like, yes, this makes me very uncomfortable, and I love that.
Yeah.
Versus this makes me very uncomfortable, and I want to change the whole thing.
Yeah.
So, but I'm learning. It's a new thing, and so it's not always comfortable for me. I'm far more comfortable doing the work than explaining the work. I don't feel like work should have to be explained.
Yeah.
But that's that's the opposite of how the film industry works. So
yeah.
Everything is constantly being explained.
Yeah. Right. I just watched I just rewatched The Player, the Robert Altman film, for the first time in a while. Man, it's such an excellent portrayal of just the seedy dirtbagness of Hollywood executives. But that whole arc of the ending of the film that was like super important and ended up being an action movie with Bruce Willis in it. But yeah, I mean, I think there's, like you had mentioned early on, that you had given pitches and people said, like, that doesn't make any sense, you should do this instead, and you had to tell them, like, no, that's what happened. This is a real thing that happened. It's not unrealistic. It did happen.
Yeah, like, it surprises me when you know, on the occasions people have said that it's not realistic, because it actually
Right. That's so great.
No, but I think it's the same as racism. Like, I think if someone hasn't had intimate lived experiences with racism or known what it's like, then it's invisible to them. So,
right.
So what I'm offering is essentially a counter narrative to what they have believed. And because it's been such a binary conversation, the idea that Chinese Americans have been harassed by the KKK is just like, what, you know?
Yeah.
And I get it. Like, you think you're walking into a steakhouse and someone like serves you a shoe or whatever, but that's what you're getting. And I don't know, it's a weird example, but
no, I get it.
Steaks and hamburgers lately, so it's coming up as an analogy. But yeah, I just try to take it. I just try to look at it from the point of view of like you're coming at this from what you know.
Yeah.
And so many people don't have intimate experiences with racism, or they think they know racism and they really don't. And because it isn't just all the really obvious forms, and it isn't just the Klan. It isn't just I mean, there are terrible forms, but there's just like different levels of it too, levels of dehumanization.
Yeah.
So I think that's why I really want to tell this film from the point of view of a kid, because she's not politicized. She's not a Democrat or Republican. She's just being a kid.
Right.
And kids sometimes try to understand things in the craziest ways.
Yeah.
So I think it's what I want to offer as an artist. And I don't know. I just think it's the thing I'm meant to make, and I would rather take less money or have to do it in a crazy way than to take the wrong money,
right,
or partner with the wrong, place or organization and miss out on this opportunity. I mean, I also look at it in terms of mortality. I mean, so much of racism is about our mortality, right?
Yeah.
I always liked Myra Kalman's quote about, she said something about art is what it means to live and what it means to die.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, the danger of racism isn't just that you could die physically, but that people are being forced to die spiritually as they're still alive and walking around.
Right.
If you can't live as a full human being, you are dying a little bit every day.
Yeah.
So I feel like it kind of, I mean, this is kind of a heavy thing to share, I guess, but I feel like it goes back to mortality. And I'm in my 40s and I don't have I'm not 20. I don't know how many films I'm going to get to make.
Yeah.
So I want to make this exactly the way I want to make it, even if it's flawed, even if some weird shit happens. Like, it just has to come from like an authentic place.
Right.
And rather that I make something that 30 people go to and sit in the movie theater and feel deeply, than that 30,000 people go to and are like, oh, that was fun. That was a great way to spend our Friday night.
Right.
So I just try to keep these goals in mind.
Yeah.
And I don't know how long it's going to take to make this thing. I mean, I've been actively working on it for 10 years, but I also think that's okay too.
Yeah.
It's a new idea to me every day as I sit down and look at it, because every time I sit down to work on it, it will tell me something about what it wants to be. So that's what I really love about working on any art project, is just the way it's just so kind of crazy how, like, all you have to do is show up and the thing will keep revealing itself to you if you listen, you know? And I just feel like, I mean, I'm not like a religious person, but I just think it's pretty crazy, you know? And so I would never not want to make art, because to have that experience in my studio or just when I'm walking around, it's just like, that's like what I live for. So it feels as important to me as any, you know, physicalized relationship. And I know I'm preaching to the choir, but I just, it feels really good to articulate.
Yeah.
Trying to stay focused about this film, because I haven't actually talked about it this way in a while. But yeah, I mean, we're all like the parents of our ideas, whether they take 5 minutes or 50 years to make. And it is a relationship with the work. So yeah. Thanks for giving me the chance to talk about it.
Thanks for diving in. I love that thought of allowing the work to teach you something new. There's something about that. I think some people are very methodical in their work, where they'll create the restrictions and then allow it to happen, and they collect that. But I think that there's other ways of working where you're you don't know where the sentence is going to go when you begin writing it. Do you feel like that's more the way you write?
I think I usually know the concept before I start working on it. Like, I'll think about the concept for a while before I start executing.
Mm-hmm.
And once I'm executing, it can go so many ways, but usually I have a pretty firm idea in mind.
Mm.
And then how it ends up looking, sounding, that's all pretty open.
Uh-huh.
But yeah.
There's a film director who was talking about that process of when they write a script, they don't write the ending ever. They begin to establish characters, and very often will be writing scenes and like start crying because they can't believe what happened, or they'll start laughing because they can't believe what happened. Like they literally have found a way into their practice of screenwriting that involves just understanding the characters and watching them interact. And then that becomes the film. And then on the second draft, cleaning that up and applying structure to it and putting it into a different sort of perspective. But not second guessing any of those interaction choices, like letting those be just like, it's just weird. It's a weird thing that's going to happen, and we're going to just let it be.
Yeah, I would say that's kind of how I work.
Yeah.
I learned a lot of stuff that I knew wasn't going to go into it, just as a way to get to know the characters, and something I've done for a lot of projects in the past too. Is if I'm just trying to get to know them, I go to Goodwill. And I'll shop for them. I'll like try to figure out what they wear, and then I'll buy that stuff, and then I'll hang it in my studio.
That's great.
I don't know, or I'll walk down the street try to walk down the street as that person, just for like a few minutes, and just see how it feels. And I don't know. I mean, I feel like there's a lot of writing that is non-writing. Like by the time I'm not actually sitting in front of the computer, the amount of writing I'm doing on the computer is not as much as just the writing I'm doing in my head as research.
Right.
And I am such a researcher. Like I'm constantly reading stuff and writing and watching stuff, and if I hear some tidbit that's interesting, I'll cycle on how for this movie, I watched a lot of documentaries on, not just on rape, but just on like kids and bullying and how kids talk to each other.
Oh,
And some of the stuff was so hard to watch, but it gave me a sense of like, yeah, like this is how 8-year-olds talk to each other.
right.
And yeah, just I love that as part of the work,
Uh-huh.
just the absorbing information and kind of being an anthropologist. And I think that's why I like projects that involve people sometimes,
Hmm.
because it lets me, it's like being an armchair journalist or armchair anthropologist. And it just, I think for me personally, a survival tactic for dealing with racism just in my personal life is to stay curious about how people are.
Right.
And so if I'm doing projects that allow me to constantly research racism, look at it from a different way, then it helps me not get um, totally hardened by racism. And because it kind of goes back to that mortality thing, like the awareness of racism and not having, like I think there are people who don't think racism even exists, and that's privilege and that's innocence.
Yeah.
That's an innocence they get to have. But Richard Pryor gave this quote during one of his shows early on where he said something like, I was a kid, I'm going to totally butcher it, but he said, I was a kid until I was 8, then I became a Negro. And I just think
Wow.
innocence is not something communities of color get to have. Like, your innocence ended really early when you're targeted with racism or you experience violence. And so for me, making art is about sort of, in some ways, reclaiming a naive or more open point of view again. It's not that I want to be naive, but just, it's probably not the right word, but just...
Oh no. I think we just lost Christy Chan for just a minute. Maybe she'll call back in short order. Wow, that was a really incredible set of work. So I was going to read a quote. So maybe I'll dive into that while we're waiting for Christy to come back. So I was thinking a lot about artist subjectivity and the trying to find the essence of their work. And I thought about this quote, which I wish Christy was here to listen to. So maybe she'll jump in midway. But I'll just dive into it. So what the artist experiences in the work of art is, in fact, that artistic subjectivity of absolute essence, for which all subject matter is indifferent. However, the pure creative formal principle split from any content is the absolute abstract in essence, which annihilates and dissolves every content in its continuous effort to transcend and actualize itself. If the artist now seeks his certainty in a particular content or faith, he is lying, because he knows that pure artistic subjectivity is the essence of everything. But if he seeks his reality in pure artistic subjectivity, he finds himself in the paradoxical condition of having to find his own essence precisely in the inessential, his content in what is mere form. His condition then is that of radical split, and outside of this split, everything is a lie. Faced with the transcendence of the creative formal principle, the artist can, of course, surrender to its violence and to try to live this principle as a new content in the general decline of all contents. Trying to make of the split that inhabits him the fundamental experience starting from which a new human station becomes possible. He can accept possession of himself only in extreme alienation, or seek the theatrical beyond of art, an alchemical crucible in which man might finally refashion his body and reconcile his split. Yet, although he believes that he is now equal to his principle, and that in this attempt he has really penetrated a region where no other man would want to follow him, in proximity to risk that threatens him more deeply than any other mortal being, Still, the artist remains on this side of his essence, since he has now definitively lost his content and is condemned forever to dwell, so to speak, beside his reality. The artist is the man without content, who has no other identity than a perpetual emerging out of nothingness, of expansion, and no other ground than his incomprehensible station of this side of himself. So that's kind of like the titular conversation in Gorgio Agamben's The Man Without Content. And I was going to read it to Christy under kind of this idea that working with oneself gives you kind of a free rein to make the right decisions and trust that the generative content is the truest possible content. So I think it looks like we're not going to get Christy back before our time is up. So I'm going to thank you, Christy, for doing this. I'll give you a call in a minute. It was really wonderful to talk to her, and when we explode into a season 2 at some point this fall, I will most definitely have Christy back and find out what the status is of her project. This Sunday at 5 p.m., I'm going to be meeting with Nana Tumasi and talking about writing and addressing difficult subject matter and thinking through how to generate a more sustainable version of self. I'm really excited about that conversation. I hope you can join me on the next episode of this new idea. Thank you.